are different, or certain age classes that we just don't see yet. But with the evidence provided right now, this is as good as I can get it. Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next talk is going to be by Aidan, Wouters, Terrestrial, Locomotion, Bats, Associations of Gait Characteristics with Body Size and Roosting Behavior. So the question becomes, is this bat doing well because it's adapted the ground to habitat, or are non-roosting bat species also able to move this well interesting content? So my research goals were to describe the terrestrial locomotion for 4 bat species using standardized biomechanical variables. And by using these variables, I was able to do direct cross-species comparisons. Essentially, I wanted to see if the gait patterns for my 4 bat species reflected patterns in how to use terrestrial resources, specifically ground roosts. And this is because the bat species that are most known for being good crawlers on the ground, they can call vampire bats, aka Desmodus rotundus, and New Zealand short-tailed bats, or Rusticeus verculata, frequently use terrestrial locomotion in order to exploit terrestrial resources like prey and roosts. So I wanted to compare the movement patterns from my stray species against these good crawlers. And since there's some big size differences among the species, I normalized all my length and distance variables by body size using forearm length as I computed the variables with the green symbol. So this is a spectrum of the relative frequency for which the species in my study use ground roosts, as we are currently aware. We have tricolored bats, or Paramyotis flavus, that primarily roost in tree foliage, and we've yet to find them roosting on the ground. Then we have big brown bats. They're generalists. They'll roost in anything, rocks, trees, buildings. But when they roost in rock crevices, it's typically elevated off of the ground. So even though they do rock roost, it's treated more like an elevated tree roost. Little brown bats, or Myotis vigus, roost in trees, buildings, and rocks as well, but their rock crevices frequently are on the ground, especially in the case of male little brown bats. And then we have our 4th stag species, Myotis which we saw in that really cool intro video. These guys very frequently ground roost directly on the ground, especially during return bee season. So to describe their locomotive patterns, I collected videos from bats during treadmill-facilitated kinematics trials. We sampled the bats in the Ottawa Valley during swarming season, and because the experimental trials were conducted in the field, we were able to release them the same night they were captured. When we caught them, bats were placed on the treadmill, and we turned it on to a flow of speed, increasing until we found the maximum speed that the bats were able to match pace with, or until we maxed out the treadmill. So to describe terrestrial locomotion, I'm looking at stride cycles and gait. A stride cycle is the period between a specific limb event, like your left forefoot strike, and the next time that event occurs, so the next left forefoot strike. And when those movements and timings for the body and limbs are repeated over several sequential strides, this is a gait. So to go over briefly the variables that I was measuring, that is another one. I looked at 2 variables primarily, stride length and stride frequency, which can both vary even in the absence of a gait transition to a running gait like we see with vampire bats. So stride length is the distance that a limb is displaced over a stride, and stride frequency is the rate that strides are completed per second. So it's together that these 2 variables determine how fast the bat is traveling. So I looked at the average speed over multiple strides, as well as the maximum speed that the bat exhibited over multiple strides. This is because some of the bats maxed out the treadmill, so we wanted to guess that's how fast they might go, but also because many bats move in these short bursts of motion, faster than they are throughout the rest of the sequence. So, I think this is the wrong one. Unfortunately, it's not going to show all of my videos over and over. But we did see some interesting differences between the study species. Let's see if we can show it again. And while it may look like they are going at the same speed, the treadmill belt underneath them are going very different speeds. And so while it may look similar, there are some really big differences between the species. Still, none of them had this aerial phase that indicates that they were doing a run. So, I'm so sorry, because this is actually the 60 slides. Especially with presentations.
You need another presentation file.
Sorry guys, 1 second.
There's the presentation file. Should I give another one? I'm going to replace it, and this is the old one.
I can't do anything on this end.
Okay, we're not going to have it here.
Sorry guys, I had to switch out presentations because some of my videos make the whole thing shut down. And it was not this one. Here are the videos actually going. So pay attention to the actual speed of the treadmill under the bat. So you can see the black lines going fast and the slightly different speeds between them all. So what my results showed is that Myotis levii and Myotis oesiphagus, so the ground roosting species, had higher velocities than the species that prefer raised roosts like Antuscus fuscus and Paramyotis inflatus, even before we normalized for body size. And the two Myotis species approached, and in their case of their maximum, these little burst velocities, they actually exceeded the means for Mysticia tuberculata and walking Desmodus rotundus, again, before we normalized for body size. And these results became even more noticeable after normalization. So the two ground roosting Myotis species had similar average speeds as both Mysticia tuberculata and as running Desmodus rotundus, even though they were still using a walking gait. In the context of body size, they actually exceeded it with their burst velocities. And they moved faster generally than the Antuscus fuscus and Paramyotis inflatus. So if they were all walking, how did the ground roosting species move faster? Well, to answer that, we have to look back at stride length and stride frequency. Antuscus fuscus was the largest study species and had the largest stride length overall. But in the context of body size, it's actually Myotis levii that has the largest stride length. Still, statistically speaking, all four species had similar stride lengths. But the two ground roosting Myotis species did have significantly higher stride frequencies than Antuscus fuscus and Paramyotis inflatus. Overall, Myotis levii and Myotis oesiphagus stride frequencies are closest to the means for Mysticia tuberculata and running Desmodus rotundus. While the differences in locomotion for the ground roosters versus the more elevated preferring roosters are interesting, why would bats like Myotis levii and Myotis oesiphagus be moving on the ground to begin with? Well, roosting within rock crevices helps provide diverse microclimates and can have energetic benefits for torpor and thermoregulation. Myotis lebii is a species that also tends to roost daily, moving between sites that are within about a 100-meter radius of each other. So rather than flying short distances between these close-set sites, it's probable that Myotis lebii and possibly Myotis ossificus are traveling between roost sites terrestrially at least sometimes. Furthermore, both Myotis species, and particularly Myotis lebii, often have inclusions of terrestrial prey like spiders in their diets. While we currently presume that this is associated with weaning behaviors, the similarities in how these two Myotis species are moving relative to Mycetium tuberculata, a bat that spends 30% of its foraging time foraging terrestrially, it's plausible that these two species might also be foraging terrestrially. Still, ground roosting can expose bats to terrestrial predators, particularly when they're in shallow roosts or moving between roost sites. And studies of Molossus parentium have shown that living on the ground is more energetically costly than flying, at least for that species. So why would species like Aptuscus fuscus and Paramyotis flavus that don't typically ground roost still be able to move relatively well on the ground? Well, even if they're not actively occupying terrestrial habitat, it's always an adjacent habitat that they can end up incidentally in. And so its survival depends on how well it can reach safety. So being able to move well on the ground is unlikely to be selected against, even if you aren't a ground rooster, and may explain why even Aptuscus fuscus and Paramyotis flavus still move relatively well. So to wrap up, what did I find? Well, species gait patterns did reflect differences in their general ground roosting preferences, and the two more commonly ground roosting species, Myotis lebii and Myotis ossificus, did have significantly higher normalized velocities and stride frequencies than Aptuscus fuscus and Paramyotis flavus relative to the more raised roosters. They also exhibited, the two Myotis species exhibited similar velocities and movement patterns as good crawlers like Mycetium tuberculata that use terrestrial locomotion to forage terrestrially and ground roost. Based on my results, I think we're still underestimating how much species like Myotis lebii and ossificus are occupying terrestrial habitats, environments where they may be exposed to environmental hazards that we're currently overlooking in their protections. And by understanding how we move, how they move, we can help design more effective methods for capturing and detecting them at sites, and develop more suitable mitigation measures for habitat loss related to mining and farming activities. That's why we should look more at bats on the ground, because these guys might not be the only ones with surprises in the story. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
Thank you for your patience, by the way.
Can you train them to be faster? When you try to train someone?
I think so. So we asked, can we train them to be faster? Our treadmill maxed out at 0.4 meters per second, slower than when Briskin used it, because we used a quieter drill and the bats behaved better. This is not the top speed that they can do, I don't think. Especially for Myotis lebii, most of them maxed out the treadmill, so I think they can go faster.